Ayes have it. The Clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 7, Veterans Affairs Legislation Amendment, Military Compensation Review and Other Measures Bill 2013, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call on the member for Patterson.
I'm a shadow of the member for Patterson.
Member for Patton, sorry.
A mere shadow.
Sorry.
But his shadow, of course, in terms of stature, is quite large. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this bill implements the adopted recommendations of the Campbell Review of Military Compensation Arrangements. The review was a 2007 Labor election commitment. Regrettably, it's taken 6 long years, we're 120 days till the election, for Labor to conclude this. Clearly, veterans is not a great priority for this government. It made 108 recommendations. The Labor government adopted 94. Further 2 will be enhanced. The total package worth about $39 million over the forward estimates, a net cost to the Commonwealth of about 17.4. There are 16 schedules, 13 of which deal directly to 13 recommendations of the review which require legislative amendment. As you know, the Campbell Review was chaired by the former Secretary of Department of Veteran Affairs, Mr Ian Campbell, PSM. It principally investigated compensation arrangements for the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act. We'll call it MERCA from now on in the speech. In March 1996, by way of background, outside of Townsville, regrettably an Army training accident involving a Black Hawk helicopter led to the death of 18 personnel and the serious injury of a further 12. At that time, it was found that the death and ancillary compensation arrangements for peacetime training accidents were inadequate, and it followed the Tanza Review that recommended a new, modern compensation scheme be adopted for military personnel wounded, injured or capacitated during their defence service. The previous coalition government consulted extensively about the legislation that was tabled in Parliament in 2003. At the time of its introduction, the former Veteran Affairs Minister, Ms Vale, said that the new bill combined the very best benefits or elements of the older Veterans Entitlement Act 1986, the VEA, and the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act 88, circa. The new legislation placed a heavy focus on rehabilitation, encouraging those able to do so to re-enter the workforce following acceptance of conditions under the legislation. Unlike the older VEA, which pays a pension for life, the MERCA gave affected ex-service personnel and their families a choice of a lump sum payment or enabled a mix of lump sum and weekly payments. Under this legislation, eligible ex-service personnel continue to have their health care covered at Australian government expense. That's a history. That's where we came from. In 2007, in the election campaign, Labor promised to review the MERCA. However, despite their good intentions in 2007, suffice to say, the process has been slow. The review process began in 2008, and in February 2011, the government was handed the outcome. Didn't formally respond until the May 2012 budget, and the introduction of the legislation in March 2013, 5 weeks before the scheduled dissolution of Parliament, can I say, is disappointing in the extreme. When asked about the government's proposed timeline, the Parliamentary Secretary, Senator David Feeney, told Senate estimates that the pursuit of a non-existent budget surplus was more important than delivering improvements to military compensation sooner. Disappointing, I think, for everyone. We're pleased to see the review. We're pleased to see that it's found that MERCA is operating soundly and only in need of minor improvements. The improvements being made in this legislation are important. They have our support. Following the introduction of the legislation, the Coalition quite rightly initiated a Senate inquiry to ensure that the veterans and ex-service community, and indeed the wider community, had an opportunity to comment on this important legislation and its review. The wider the comment, the sounder the outcome, a lesson we should all learn. Submissions acknowledged that proposed legislation mirrored the recommendations adopted by the government and for the most part supported its passage. Our concerns, though, and they should be tabled, Our concerns are it's taken the government until now to partially adopt Recommendation 25.1, regarding the extension of non-liability mental health care treatment to veterans and ex-service people. We also note that this entitlement will not be available until 1 July next year. Recommendation 25.1 and the position preferred by the Department of Veterans Affairs, Defence and the independent analysis from Peter Sutherland said that the government should consider providing non-liability health cover under MERCA for certain psychiatric conditions to all former members of the ADF and part-time reservists who have served after 1 July 2004. Typically, Finance, Treasury and DUA preferred a wait-and-see approach, saying that more information was required before a final decision was taken. You've only had 6 years. How much more information do you want? This occurred over the last 12 months and resulted in an announcement on the 3rd of May in the Defence White Paper of a limited increase in entitlements back to 1994, but only when the ex-service personnel had a minimum of 3 years equivalent full-time service. This $14.6 million extension, whilst welcome, is at odds with the original recommendation from DVA in Defence, and further information will be sought through the Senate estimates period coming up shortly. The budget similarly does not provide any funding for additional advocacy funding support, continuing, unfortunately, Labor's neglect of grassroots veterans advocacy in the community. Labor's decision 2 years ago to strip $4 million from the BEST funding will only make it more difficult for younger veterans and their families to access independent advice and support about making claims. The government's announcement of additional taxpayer funds to reduce administrative process times in the department is surely an admission that their cuts to the BEST program and advocacy funding have had an impact on the timely determination of compensation claims, and I fail to see how it can be taken any other way. Now, the gaping hole in this budget was, however, the lack of commitment by this government to fair indexation. It's a fair point that should be made. To those veterans and ex-service personnel and their families listening or reading this, let me reaffirm the Coalition's commitment. We will deliver fair indexation in the Coalition's first budget. The Leader of the Opposition has signed that pledge twice, first at the Bendigo RSL, and second, I joined him for the signing and signed myself personally to it in Queanbeyan only 1 or 2 months ago. If the government changes, then the unfair, unjust and inequitable indexation arrangements facing DFRDB and DFRB military superannuants aged 55 and over will also change. This can only happen with a change of government. If elected on the 14th September in next May's budget, we will deliver fair indexation. No ifs, no buts. Under our changes on 1 July next year, the pensions of those in DFRB, DFRDB will increase by the same factor as aged and service pensions. Having gone through the history of the bill, having gone through some of its flaws and reaffirmed the Coalition on the indexation of military superannuation, it's important to look at the 16 schedules, 13 of which relate to adopted recommendations of the review. As I've said at the start of this, the Coalition will provide the Minister with support for the bill. Schedule 1, Rehabilitation and Transition Management. The amendments enhance rehabilitation services and transition management. Chapter 7 of the review dealt with transition management between Defence and DVA. It found that greater consistency in transition across the services is more likely if the CDF was coordinating transition rather than leaving, as is the case, to the chiefs of each individual service. The amendment will also give part-time reservist personnel access to transition management assistance, the first under any legislation, which is a good thing. This amendment will redesignate the responsibility of the service chiefs for the rehabilitation of our soldiers, sailors, airmen and women to the CDF. Schedule 2 is compensation for permanent impairment. The amendments in Schedule 2 make the date of effect for periodic impairment compensation to be on the basis of each accepted condition rather than all accepted conditions, and to incorporate a lifestyle factor in the calculation of interim permanent impairment compensation. Under the current arrangements, compensation is paid only once all claims for compensation have been assessed. This has been found to be a somewhat lengthy process. By paying compensation from the date at which liability for each condition is accepted, compensation will flow to members and former members of the ADF, presumably much sooner. The schedule also relates to compensation offsetting arrangements. This amendment will grant those already assessed under the old offsetting formula the ability to have their compensation reassessed under the new compensation offsetting formula methodology. This is supported by the veteran and ex-service community and clearly by the Coalition. Schedule 3 will see the expanded lump sum options for wholly dependent partners. The amendments expand the options for lump sum compensation for wholly dependent partners of deceased members. Chapter 9 of the review dealt with death benefit provisions of MERCA. It's recommended a simplification and streamlining of current arrangements. Currently, where a member's death is service-related, his or her wholly dependent partner is eligible to receive a lifetime periodic payment, war widow, widower's pension, an additional death benefit, a reparation health card for all conditions, let's call it a gold card, and a range of other benefits depending upon their circumstances. This amendment simplifies the payment arrangements by combining the current age-based lump sum, an actuarial calculation of the war widow widower's pension against life tables, and the ADB, the additional death benefit, to create a new combined lump sum, making the package simpler and demonstrably easier to understand. It will also give partners a choice of converting their pension into a lifetime lump sum or into 25%, 50% or 75% lump sums with a weekly balance in terms of pension. Schedule 4 is a weekly compensation for eligible young persons. It's a one-time increase in the rate of periodic compensation payable for dependent children, so the rate aligns with similar payments under CIRCA. In 2004, the rates of payment under MERCA were the same as those of CIRCA. However, changes made in 2008 to CIRCA broke this nexus, if we can call it that, and they increased dramatically. Currently, CIRCA payments are about $130.89 a week, whereas the MERCA payment is about $87.57 a week. The aligning makes sense. Schedule 5 is compensation for financial advice and legal advice, with a new limit rising to $2,400. Schedule 6, the amendments expand the eligibility rate for special rate disability pensions. The expanded criteria will include a person who would otherwise meet the criteria in section 199 of MERCA, except for the person having received a lump sum incapacity payment under section 138, or the person is receiving a nil rate of incapacity payment because the amount of the incapacity payment is fully offset by the Commonwealth superannuation. Schedule 6 does not relate to a specific recommendation of the review, but rather an observation found in paragraph 11.43. The ex-service community strongly endorses these changed arrangements, and it certainly makes some sense. The amendments in Schedule 7 make changes to certain superannuation provisions, so they apply equally to both serving and former members, and to amend the definition of a Commonwealth superannuation scheme. Chapter 12 of the review considered the interoperation of military superannuation arrangements and the military compensation arrangements. The committee noted that this was not an in-depth analysis, but, quote, did note the complexities of administration of invalidity and death benefits, end quote, and recommended an analysis across government of how to streamline the administration of these arrangements. The government accepted this recommendation, but no information about the progress of this analysis has been forthcoming. Suffice to say, Minister, we will further examine it at Senate estimates. And I certainly ask the Minister for further detailed progress on this particular recommendation. Schedule 8 is the remittal powers of the Veterans Review Board. They provide the Veterans Review Board with an explicit power to remit a matter to the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Commission for needs assessment and compensation. The streamlining of the claims appeals process is certainly welcomed by the veteran and ex-service community. It will make it easier for veterans to appeal decisions about their compensation and give veterans with claims under MERCA the same appeal system, largely as those under the VEA. Schedule 9 amendments increase the membership of the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Commission from 5 members to 6. We note that the review recommends the additional appointee be someone like the Director Joint Health Command. Our view is that this would be, for the most part, a sensible appointment, and we look forward to the government confirming this particular appointment onto the Compensation Commission. The amendments to Schedule 10 require all claims for conditions accepted under the VEA and aggravated by Defence Service after 1 July 2004 to be determined under the VEA rather than offering a choice between the VEA and MERCA, which is currently the case, all of which we agree with. Schedule 11 amendments will enable the issuing of a reparation health cards for specific conditions, let's call it white cards, to Part 11 defence-related claimants under CIRCA. This initiative is intended to achieve consistency in treatment arrangements for all former Defence Force members. CIRCA members with an injury accepted under CIRCA as being related to CIRCA, let's call that a CIRCA-related injury, will be entitled to treatment for a CIRCA injury either under MERCA or the VEA in accordance with arrangements established under those various acts. Now, this change is supported in principle. There are concerns that have been raised about the operation of these proposed new arrangements. Similarly, providers are worried that they'll be forced to charge lower rates for services they are currently providing at higher rates. Now, DVA has informed us that the consultation with industry is ongoing, and the matter, again, Minister, will be pursued at Senate estimates to alleviate our concerns on exactly how this would operate. It sounds all right. The devil, as in many cases, is in the detail. The amendments in Schedule 12 define defence members undergoing career transition, personnel holding honorary ranks and authorised representatives of philanthropic organisations as members under MERCA. Fair enough. Schedule 13, the amendments clarify the appropriation of costs for certain aged care services between VEA, the Australian Participants in Nuclear Test Treatment Act and MERCA, and the Aged Care Act 1997 and the Aged Care Transition Provision Act 1997. Fair enough. Schedule 14 will extend the entitlements for travelling expenses to the partner of certain eligible persons under certain conditions. The VEA currently only provides for the veteran to be paid a travelling allowance when attending medical appointments to accept or to treat accepted conditions. In circumstances where the veteran's attendant, a carer, needs to accompany the veteran, travelling expenses may be met. Schedule 15, the amendments will clarify and streamline the administrative arrangements for the payment of pensions, compensation and other pecuniary benefits under the VEA and the MERCA into appropriate bank accounts. And of course, the amendments in Schedule 16 include a minor and consequential amendment to the Social Security Act 1991 that clarifies which payments made under the MERCA are excluded income for the purposes of the Social Security Act. Suffice to say, the Coalition is happy to support the passage of this legislation through the House. It will go to the Senate and, of course, be further considered at the end of June. We will not in any way seek to hold up the passage of the legislation, which we believe provides benefits to veterans, ex-service personnel and their families, and we look forward, Ministers, to the swift passage of the legislation through the House and the Senate, noting there are only 4 and a little bit weeks left, of which 2 weeks for the Senate estimates to occur, which only leaves literally 2 weeks in the Senate for legislation to be passed. I will leave that to you, Minister, to sort through in terms of the Senate.